So the disciples, seeing a theological enigma here, honestly asked Jesus the question, who sinned that this man should be in this condition? The man or his parents? I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we still do this a lot today. We see something that's wrong in this world, something that we know isn't quite right, and we naturally ask the question, how did this happen? Even in our secular world today, we see things like crime and poverty and addiction, and we ask ourselves, whose fault is this? Are people generally responsible for the situation that they find themselves in? Or has society failed them? Or perhaps has society even set them up for failure? Whose fault is this? Now, yes, there are wicked people in this world. People who feed off of other people's suffering and pain. But for the most part, at least I'd like to hope that most of humanity is not pro-poverty. Most of us would see pain and suffering in others as a bad thing. There's something wrong here. It's not supposed to be this way. Whose fault is it? Why has this happened? How do we fix it? Because if we were inconsiderate to the poor, that would be very short-sighted of us. And it would neglect the truth that the ongoing existence of the poor among us becomes bad news for all of us as a society. Now we can, and certainly do, argue in the political realm whose fault these things are and how we might best move forward to solve them. But what about natural disasters? What about things that the insurance company would describe as acts of God? Whose fault is that? And even if we could attribute some of things like bad weather or sin and brokenness and evil in this world partly onto humanity, we certainly can't blame humanity for everything that's bad in this world. So whose fault is it? Whose fault is it when it comes to things like accidental death, miscarriages, or a man that would be born blind? Well, it seems to me there's only really two choices. It's either our fault or it's God's fault. That's the theological weight behind the question that the disciples are asking Jesus about the man who was born blind. Whose fault is this? If you've ever read the book of Job in the Bible, then you know that it really pushes you in our understanding of God and goodness. As you go through that book, you start to really push to the edge of wanting to say, God, is it fair the way you treated Job? Were you wrong to allow Satan to torment him like that? God, wouldn't it be wrong to allow somebody to be blind from birth? Is that your fault? Especially if there's nothing that we could do to make sense of it, like maybe misbehavior of the parents' part before he was born, or maybe even he did something in the something that we could point to answer the question, why has this happened? Whose fault is it when things that are seemingly out of our control, that are bad, happen in this world? That is the weight behind the question of the disciples this morning. And it runs theologically very deep when it comes to our understanding of God and goodness. Jesus responds to this question by saying, neither the parents nor the man sinned that he should be born blind, but so that the glory of God might be made manifest among us through his life. I don't know, Jesus, that kind of sounds like a book of Job type of answer to me. Are we to infer that the only reason why this man has spent his entire life blind is because that one day Jesus would come along and heal this man and then we could glorify God because of it? And would that answer even be enough for us if that was the case? I think it's fair to at least wrestle with that question. That's the question that the book of Job forces us to question. Like, is God good because God decides to be good? Meaning that there is some other reference of goodness outside of or beyond God that God must adhere to? Or does God define what goodness is? Making it absurd for us to ever stand in judgment of God and his goodness. Why? We typically would blame the person for the reason why the person is in the situation that they are in. It's because we mistakenly think that the only other option is to blame God. But because of human free will, because of shared power within this world, friends, we need not make the theological mistake that just because something has happened inside God's world, that is necessarily a reflection of God's will for it to happen. I like to say that just because it logically tracks that everything happens for a reason, it doesn't mean that everything happens for a good reason, or even a God reason. So yes, birth defects and other tragedies may sometimes be a result of something you can point to. Maybe the bad behavior of the parents. But far more often than not, and this is the case in what Jesus is saying here, is really it's just because this is a fallen, broken world. Corrupted by sin. And in a world where we can choose to follow God's will or choose not to, there are consequences for that. And so the price of human freedom is high. But if you're ever inclined to think that the price of human freedom is too high, then I would gently point to the one who paid the price for human freedom when it was at its highest.